When you think of Christian Dior, you probably picture precision, elegance, and timeless glamour. But in 1996, a new designer arrived who would change everything. John Galliano brought drama, historical references, and extreme silhouettes to the Paris runways, turning Dior into a house that was impossible to ignore. From his childhood in Gibraltar to his groundbreaking collection at Central St. Martin's, and finally to the haute couture stages of Paris, Galliano's vision made fashion bold, theatrical, and unforgettable, for better and sometimes for worse. John Galliano was born in 1960 in Gibraltar, which is a small British territory at the southern tip of Spain. He was born Juan Carlos Antonio Galliano Guillen. His father was a plumber, and his mother, who was originally from Spain, dedicated herself to the home. When he was 6 years old, his family moved to South London in search of better opportunities. And that's when he anglicized his name and changed it to John Galliano. This was not uncommon at the time because many immigrant families changed their names to assimilate more easily and avoid discrimination. So from early on, he lived between two cultures, one that is the Mediterranean culture at home and grey London outside. His mother Anita had a huge impact on him. She was extremely meticulous and elegant. She would dress carefully for every outing, even the small ones, and she dressed John with a strong sense of presentation and grooming. John Galliano has often credited his mother's attention to detail as one of his earliest influences, which is a discipline that later transformed into theatrical precision in the runway. Growing up in South London in the 1970s, wasn't glamorous. Galliano was artistic, imaginative, and he felt different from the other boys around him at the time. He was fascinated with historical costumes, with old Hollywood, Spanish culture, and so that love for storytelling started very young. When John Galliano entered Central St. Martin's in the early 1980s, he quickly distinguished himself through the depths of his historical research and his almost excessive obsession to silhouettes at a time when many young designers were reacting to contemporary street style and emerging minimalism. Galliano gravitated toward the past. He studied costume history, the French Revolution, and the psychology of dress. His approach to fashion education was less about trend forecasting and more about immersion. He was known for spending long hours researching historical periods in detail, sketching characters rather than garments, and constructing full visual words around his collections. This method that is rooted in storytelling and character development would later define his career. His 1984 graduate collection, named Les Incroyables, marked a decisive turning point. He was inspired by the incroyable and merveilleuse of post-revolutionary France, which was the aristocratic youth who adopted exaggerated, almost defiant style after the fall of Robespierre. The collection explored the idea of fashion as a response to political and social upheaval. Galliano reinterpreted late 18th century tailoring through elongated coats, high collars, dramatic lapels, and bias cut construction. What made the collection particularly striking was not only its theatricality, but its technical control. Even at that early stage, Galliano demonstrated a deep understanding of cut and drape, especially in his use of bias cutting to create fluidity and movements. The garments suggested fragility and rebellion at the same time, echoing the instability of the historical movement that inspired the collection. The impact was immediate. immediate. The influential London shop Browns purchased the entire collection after the show, which effectively launched his professional career. And more importantly, Les Incroyables established many of the themes that would later reappear throughout his work, like historical romanticism, political undertones, exaggerated proportions, and the transformation of identity through dress. In retrospect, the choice of revolutionary France as his central reference is particularly significant. Decades later, John Galliano would become the creative director of one of France's most iconic fashion houses. So in that way, his graduation collection already demonstrated his fascination with French history, spectacle, and the power of clothing to embody cultural drama. Throughout the mid to late 1980s, Galliano created his own fashion label. His work during that period was highly romantic, historically influenced, and technically ambitious, but also financially unstable. At the time, London was creatively vibrant, but not structurally supportive of couture-level productions. Galliano's collections were praised critically, yet he struggled with funding, with production costs, and business management. By the early 1990s, his career had stalled financially. It was only after moving to Paris, supported by influential figures like stylist Amanda Arlick and editor Anna Wintour, that his trajectory shifted dramatically. In Paris, he presented collections that redefined his historical romanticism with greater technical discipline. The industry began to see him not just as a talented eccentric, but as a serious couture designer. In 1995, he was appointed creative director at Givenchy, becoming the first British designer to head a major French couture house. His tenure was brief, but symbolically important because it marked his entry into the Parisian fashion establishment. And in 1996, he was appointed the creative director of Christian Dior. That was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for Dior itself. Dior had a powerful legacy rooted in the 1947 New Look, built on structure, femininity, and elegance. Galliano inherited that, but rather than preserving it conservatively, he amplified it through spectacle and narrative intensity. His first collections for Dior immediately signaled a shift. There were a lot of extreme corsets, a lot of dramatic historical references, hyper feminized silhouettes, and rich embroidery and craftsmanship. Beneath the theatrical surface, there was rigorous technical knowledge. Galliano really understood Dior's construction codes, the emphasis on the waist, the structural tailoring, the architectural approach to femininity, and he exaggerated all of it. Under his direction, Dior became one of the most influential fashion houses of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Couture shows were transformed into elaborate productions that blended fashion, history, and performance. Ready-to-wear collections became commercially powerful, while his era at Dior defined a moment in fashion when maximalism, fantasy, and luxury spectacle dominated the global imagination. John Galliano's tenure at Christian Dior was defined by his ability to merge historical inspiration with technical mastery, creating garments that were both dramatic and meticulously constructed. He also became known for emphasizing storytelling in fashion. Each runaway show was a fully immersive world. Models sometimes performed characters, and clothing functioned almost as costumes. In many cases, the clothes became cultural events in themselves, covered extensively by the press and influencing global fashion trends. One of Galliano's most famous creations for Dior is the blue silk gown that was worn by Princess Diana. It was designed in 1996 for a gala, and it featured a very beautiful blue hue that was chosen to complement the princess complexion. It had a fluid floor-length silhouette that emphasized the movements and the elegance of the dress, that gave the gown structure while also maintaining its softness. And that gown became iconic not just because it was beautiful, but because it encapsulated Galliano's vision, the historical inspiration and theatricality that was made wearable for a modern royal figure. Another one of Dior's iconic design was the saddle bag. It was introduced in 1999 when he was a creative director. The shape of the bag was immediately distinctive because it was curved like a horse saddle with a short strap that was designed to sit tightly under the arm. At the time, most luxury handbags were structured and rectangular, and so the saddle bag completely broke that symmetry. The equestrian inspiration nodded to Dior's heritage and the aristocratic codes of a French style. Throughout the years, there were many different versions of the bag that were released. Some of them featured the Dior monogram canvas, sometimes bold hardware, sometimes beautiful embellishments. The bag became a cultural obsession in the early 2000s. It appeared on celebrities, on magazines, and most memorably on Carrie Bradshaw in Sex and the City, which helped cement its status as a must-have accessory. Like many early 2000 trends, the saddle bag eventually fell out of favor as minimalism took over in the late 2000s. For a time, it became a symbol of an excessive logo era, but then in 2018, Maria Grazia Chiuri reintroduced the saddlebag at Dior. She reworked it with updated proportions and new materials while keeping its iconic curved silhouettes. That revival aligned perfectly with the resurgence of Y2K nostalgia. The bag surged in value on resale platforms, and it became relevant again for a new generation. Some of Galliano's other legendary contributions to Dior includes the Femme Fatale collection in 1997, where he featured corseted gowns with extreme silhouettes that were inspired by the 1940s Hollywood glamour. Then there was the fall 1998 couture Russian collection with luxurious fabrics and elaborate embellishments that was inspired by the Tsarist Russia. The 2000s Egyptian and samurai inspired couture that blended historical motifs with modern silhouettes. Galliano's Dior era proved that couture could be both rigorous and fantastical, technical and theatrical, historical and contemporary. We cannot talk about John Galliano at Dior without mentioning Pat McGrath. She's often described as the makeup queen of fashion, and she was Galliano's right-hand collaborator. She was responsible for translating his dramatic, theatrical vision into reality on the runway. She joined Dior in the late 1990s and quickly became integral to the house's shows. Pat McGrath's artistry brought Galliano's vision to life. She experimented with colors, with textures, and with techniques that were unprecedented in haute couture, creating looks that were bold and cinematic. Her makeup told a story just as much as the fashion, so her collaboration with John Galliano wasn't just about the makeup, it was about creating a complete visual identity for Dior shows. Together they choreographed the interaction of hair, makeup, clothing, and even lighting to ensure the narrative of each collection was fully realized. McGrath's ability to push the boundaries of beauty allowed Galliano's ideas to read clearly on the runway and in editorial photography. Without McGrath, many of Galliano's iconic Dior shows would have lacked the theatrical impacts that made them unforgettable. She turned makeup into storytelling, transforming the models into living, breathing extensions of his imaginative world. So her work cemented the idea that makeup in haute couture is not just decoration, but a fundamental part of the creative vision. Despite his extraordinary talent and theatrical genius, John Galliano's career at Christian Dior ended abruptly in 2011 amid serious controversy. In February of that year, Galliano was filmed making anti-Semitic remarks in a Parisian cafe, which were widely circulated in the media. The comments shocked the fashion world and the public, igniting outrage internationally. The backlash was immediate, and Dior terminated his contract immediately. Galliano faced not only professional consequences but also legal scrutiny. He was eventually convicted in France for publicly insulting a group based on religion and received a suspended fine. That scandal marked a turning point. Galliano's persona that was once celebrated for exaggeration and theatricality became associated with public controversy. It also prompted a broader conversation in fashion about the limits of eccentricity, celebrity culture, and accountability. Although he later returned to fashion at Maison Margiela, the Dior scandal remains a defining moment in his legacy. It underscored that while his designs could inspire awe and admiration, his behavior had real-world consequences that unfortunately overshadowed even his most iconic creations. John Galliano's era at Dior was a mixture of brilliance, spectacle, and controversy. He transformed the house into a stage, made couture unforgettable, and proved that fashion could both be art and cultural conversation. Yet his downfall reminds us that talent alone isn't enough. Responsibility and humanity matter too. Today, Dior continues to evolve under new creative voices, but Galliano's imprint on fashion is indelible. His designs, his drama, and even his mistakes have left a legacy that would be studied, admired, and debated for generations. In the end, Dior under Galliano was never just clothing, it was performance, it was narrative, and it was unforgettable. Don't hesitate to leave a comment below, let me know what your thoughts about this video, and I'll see you next week. Take care, bye!